And I'm Skylar.
This is Histories, Mysteries, and Conspiracies. Today I'm talking about the dark history of the murder of Emmett Till. Okay, so the first thing I always like to ask my guests is, what do you know? But you said you did research.
Yeah, so I did. I mean, I watched a couple videos before, and
how about before you did your research, what did you know about
I did know who he was, and I did know the significance of his death, but first of all, I didn't know about the open casket at the funeral, which I think that we can talk about that, of course, but I didn't know about that. And I think there's a lot of monuments about him, right? And so I think I've been somewhere and it was an Emmett Till monument, and I just don't remember specifically where I was, but so yeah, I definitely knew the name and knew about his murder, but I didn't know a lot of the details and how that led into what it was, basically.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever learn about Emmett Till in school, in high school or anything?
I'm just gonna go with no. I don't particularly remember, but I went to I went to a private school, and I would just say broadly, I'm not gonna name drop, but it was a horrible education. Was
it a Christian school?
It was a Christian school. I didn't want to say that, but yeah, I just I especially I look back on my education on science and my education on civil rights and history, and it was obviously all slanted in one direction, and I'm sure they didn't go into situations like this. But yeah, so I really don't think I did you?
I actually did, and the funny thing was, for my freshman year of high school, I went to a private Christian school, and that's where I learned about it.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
Was it in a literature class or something, or no?
It was in my English class, and I don't even remember, I think we had to read To Kill a Mockingbird, and so I think it was surrounded around that, and that's why we brought it up.
I did read that in high school.
So I think that's why we talked about it.
So yeah, very different schooling experiences too.
Yeah, I remember learning about it in school and just being I guess because I didn't grow up with any I don't know, I guess I never personally saw any racism issues in my life. And so I think when I learned about that in school, I knew racism existed, but I never saw it. I never really understood it. Mm-hmm. And then once I learned about that, I was this is insane, first of all. And I was I can't believe how recent it was. This happened the year after my mom was born. Mm-hmm. And all this stuff was just crazy. And I remember that was also my first time learning about double jeopardy, and I was that is bullshit. I was why do things like this exist? And yeah
for sure. When we think about civil rights and when we think about our country's history, I think we as people just have such a easy time downplaying the existence of how close it was. And I recently saw this meme, which of course memes are usually, shit. But this one was actually, and most of them aren't true or they're very slanted. But this one just was making a statement that I think it was Martin Luther King Jr., Barbara Walters and Anne Frank were all born in the same year, which I cannot even think of the Holocaust and Martin Luther King Jr. being anywhere close to each other. All of that is so compartmentalized. That's a really hard word for me to say, but anyways, those are also
broken
up in my mind, but those things are happening at the same time, and Barbara Walters is still alive. So the fact that Anne Frank and Anne Frank and Martin Luther King Jr. could still easily be living is just so interesting.
It's crazy. All right, we should probably get into Emmett Till now.
Yeah.
So he was born July 25th, 1941 in Chicago. He was from the south side of Chicago, and basically everyone in his family, friends, just described him as a jokester and a fun-loving kid. They knew him as responsible, funny, infectiously high-spirited child. And I think that's one thing that, especially during the case, a lot of people forgot is he was a kid. He was a boy, a child. He was 14.
14 is so young if you really think about it.
It's so crazy. To me, now I think 18-year-olds are young. Mm-hmm. And so it's 14-year-olds are just babies.
For sure, yeah.
It's insane. But he actually had polio at the age of 5, which left him with a slight stutter. And one thing that's important is one thing that he struggled with were saying B's. So he had a really hard time saying B's, which becomes important when it comes to the claims that everyone put against him. He was the only child of Louis and Mamie Till, and I think that's how I say his mom's name. Might be Mamie.
Only son? Did he have siblings?
I don't think so. He was the only child.
Okay.
So he didn't have any siblings, which makes this like even more heartbreaking. And his dad actually, so his dad was notoriously abusive to his mom. They got in a lot of fights, and I think they got a divorce. I can't remember if they got a divorce or the mom just like left him and they were separated. But his dad, Louis, went to the army during World War II where he died. Now, it comes out later that he was actually executed for rape. But like when he died, his Mamie Till didn't even know why he died. So she got his ring, which had LT on it, which she ended up giving to Emmett. Now, Emmett's mom, Mamie, was just this badass lady. So she was a single mom. She worked super long. She was brilliant. She worked for the Air Force as a clerk, and she was in charge of secret and confidential files. She also worked like more than 12-hour days, and Emmett Till was raised basically by his grandparents, and he helped out his mom a lot around the house. And his mom even said that Emmett had all the house responsibility. I mean, everything was really on his shoulders, and Emmett took it upon himself. He told me if I would work and make the money, he would take care of everything else. He cleaned and cooked quite a bit, and he even took over the laundry. So he was just like a good kid. Like he was just a kid, having fun, living his life. He attended an all-black school, and his classmates and friends said that he was fun. He always had just a bunch of jokes to tell. He loved making people laugh. And one of his friends, Richard Hurd, said that he was a chubby kid. Most of the kids are skinny, but he didn't let that stand in his way, and he made a lot of friends at school. Now, in August of 1955, his great-uncle Moses Wright came up from Mississippi to visit the family in Chicago. After the stay, Wright was going back to Mississippi, and he wanted to take Emmett's cousin, Wheeler Parker, and Emmett wanted to go with him. So he begged his mom, and she was like, okay. And the day before he left, his mom gave him the ring from his father with the initials LT on it. Emmett arrived in...
Is this like the time period where it's like separate or equal but separate?
Yeah.
Am I saying that backwards? No, equal but separate. Yeah.
I think so.
Okay.
Now, he arrived in... it says Money, Mississippi, but I don't know if it's pronounced Money, Mississippi. Maybe... I'm just going to call it Money, Mississippi. So he arrived there on August 21st. He stayed with his great-uncle Moses, who was a sharecropper, and he spent his days helping with the cotton harvest. And also, before he left too, which I didn't write in my notes, but his family, told him, they're like, yeah, you're a jokester and a fun kid, but you can't do that in Mississippi. Chicago is a whole different area. The South is just a lot worse than we are. You just need to, be ready to beg, kiss ass. You can't be sassy and all this stuff. So they warned him beforehand, you just have to be prepared. It's a whole different environment there. Now, on August 24th, Emmett and a group of his friends went to a local grocery store. And what happened here, there's a lot of different...
accounts of it.
Yeah, a lot of different debates about what happened, what was said. Now, some people say that the boys dared Emmett to go talk to the cashier, who was a white woman named Carol Bryant. What actually happened, what Carol Bryant admitted years and years later, was that she doesn't even remember the conversation, and he never even touched her. They may have touched hands. But what they knew is that he did purchase bubblegum, and he was accused of wolf whistling at Carol Bryant, flirting with her, grabbing her, just being super lewd with her, using lewd language, all of this stuff, saying bye baby when she was leaving. And I also want to bring back the fact that he has trouble pronouncing B's. And also, apparently, because of his speech impediment, his mom would teach him to whistle to gain better control of his mouth, to help him speak better, and it helped him gain confidence. So he could have just been whistling because he was nervous.
Now, did the woman complain, or was it just other people in the store? It's
unclear.
Okay.
So, they don't really know. They think, I've seen some things that say the people who witnessed it reported it to Carol Bryant's husband, who was also the store owner. But she may have said something it was a bunch of teenage boys come into her store, the store with her, and she felt really uncomfortable. So it's it could have just been she just said something to her husband about it, and he just took it and ran with it.
And ran with it, yeah.
So it's unclear. Now, Emmett didn't mention this to his great uncle, but on the early morning hours of August 28th, Roy Bryant, which was the cashier's husband and the store owner, and J.W. Millam, which was his half-brother, forced their way into Wright's home and abducted Emmett at gunpoint. Now, I guess, like, a lot of people have issues with that because he, the uncle just let them in to get it. But there's also other kids in the home, and him and his wife, and both of the men had guns. So once you're in that situation, too, it's like they could have, like, burned their house down for all he knew. Brian and Millam took Emmett to the Tallahatchie River. They beat him and gouged out one of his eyes. They killed him with a single gunshot to the head, which was delivered, like, I think it was either in the temple or behind the ear on one side, but it went, like, through his face. And so that just, like, added to the actually identifying his body. Mm-hmm. Then after that, they tied him to a large metal fan with a length of barbed wire, which was a 75-pound cotton gin fan, before dumping him into the river. I also read somewhere else that they actually had him carry the fan to that point where he was killed, which is just horrible. Wright reported the kidnapping to the police, and Brian and Millam were arrested the following day. On August 31st, 1955, Emmett's corpse was discovered in the river. I can't even imagine being the person discovering that. His face was unrecognizable, and they could only identify him by his ring. Now, on September 2nd, less than 2 weeks after he had left, the train bearing his remains arrived in Chicago. And that was a big deal, too, because the police in Mississippi wanted to bury him as soon as possible because the damage was so bad. They knew it was going to, like, create something. And they're like, we just need to cover this up as fast as we possibly can. And, like, he was almost in the ground when his mom was like, absolutely not. Like, and she contacted Chicago officials that helped her get his body back to Chicago as well. Oh, and then afterwards, once they were like, okay, yeah, we'll send it to you in Chicago, but you can't open the casket. Like, don't look at him. Basically, like, a mother should never have to see that. That was, like, their excuse, but she did, and she had a open casket funeral, which is what you were talking about. Mm-hmm. Now, tens of thousands of people attended the funeral, and she said that despite the enormous pain it caused her to see her son's dead body on display, she opted for an open casket funeral in an effort to let the world see what has happened because there's no way I could describe this. And I needed somebody to help me tell what it was like. The images of his body in the casket appeared in Jet magazine and in the Chicago Defender, and his murder became a rallying point for the civil rights movement. The trial began on September 19th, 1955. From the witness stand, Wright identified the men who kidnapped Till, which that was a big deal too, because it's basically like if the mafia does something to you and you actually point out the mafia, it's like, they're going to come back and kill you. Yeah. For talking. And so for him to do that was a huge deal. And also there were men that witnessed the murder, or at least like they either were eyewitnesses or ear witnesses. I think there was a few of them, but they were black men as well. And Bryant and Millam threatened them that they wouldn't talk, that they didn't see anything, all this stuff, because they tried to find them for the court case, but they were actually in prison, conveniently, during the time the trial was happening. After 4 days of testimony and a little more than an hour of deliberation, an all-white, all-male jury acquitted Bryan and Millam of all charges. And another thing about this was that everybody apparently, like, in the town, in the area, knew that they killed them. So it wasn't that they weren't guilty, but they all believed that because they were told the story about Carol Bryant just being disrespected, they thought that Emmett Till deserved to die. Mm-hmm. So that's why they basically allowed them to be acquitted. And then they were protected from further prosecution by the double jeopardy statutes. And they were paid for their story and interviewed by their lawyer and a journalist in a 1956 article for Look magazine, which they talked about all the details of the kidnapping and the murder and essentially admitted it.
Yeah, I think they fully admitted that they actually did.
Went into detail what they did too. Now, in 2004, the FBI reopened the case. So Bryan and Millam were dead, but they want to obtain a conclusive account of what happened to Emmett during his final hours. They led a 3-year investigation, and his body was exhumed for a complete autopsy. It did not lead to the filing of criminal charges, but it did uncover a deathbed confession by Millam's brother Leslie, who admitted his own involvement in the kidnapping and murder. After the exhumation, his body was reburied in a new casket, and the original one was placed in storage at Burr Oak Cemetery in Illinois. And then, because they're going to do a memorial there. But then in 2009, a scandal involving the reselling of grave plots led police to investigate the cemetery, and they discovered Emmett's original casket rusting and abandoned in a work shed on the outskirts of the property. But later that year, the casket was donated to the Smithsonian National Museum of African American History and Culture. So his original casket is now at the Smithsonian.
Wow.
And his murder and open casket funeral, I listened to this podcast, which I can't remember what the name of it was. I feel really bad. But they were talking about how they really emphasized the fact that his mom decided to do the open casket funeral. Like, his mom was just such an amazing woman, and the fact that she did that and really emphasized that, and she used her voice was a huge part for the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And just a few months later, and so that happened in August, and a few months later in December was when Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on an Alabama city bus, sparking the Montgomery bus boycott. And then 9 years later, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, like, I guess, like, the thing I want to really talk about or focus on is the open casket. Obviously, it's horrifying, but I just think it's, like, you know, we talk about symbols, and, like, that is just a symbol of, you know, where, like, we were at as a culture, where, like, basically that was acceptable. And how do we see that it was acceptable? It, you know, in the trial, that clearly was acceptable. And it's just so horrifying. Like, the whole story from, like, segment to segment to segment is, like, just so horrifying. And it's hard to, like, say that good came out of this, but I, like, of course there is, like, an upside to this of, like, the change in our society post this. And of course there's a lot of things going on at this time, but this was clearly one of those bigger picture things that kind of possibly turned our country in a better direction. I'm going to say not the best direction or really a good direction, but I do think that the civil rights movement, maybe there wouldn't have been so much, you know, as a big of a movement if it wasn't for this. So, yeah. Yeah.
And I definitely agree with that. Cause I mean, I feel like that's the whole reason why it's the casket is that's at the Smithsonian now, is cause that was the casket that was in the funeral, and that showed him. And I saw pictures of the funeral, and his mom even had, like, a picture, like, of him, you know, before, all, like, propped up right there. And so, like, you could obviously see, like, the before and after.
Yeah, I just think, like, you commended, like, her courage in doing that. And I think in the time, like, I can't even imagine, like, at that time, like, making that hard of a decision. But obviously in retrospect, it's, like, how incredible and, like, hard. Like, I think I can recognize both of those things, but, like, for her to do this was just so, like you said, like, against the norm. I mean, usually, like, you know, if there's an accident, like a car accident, you don't have an open casket. But this was so, like, it wasn't just to have an open casket so that they could, like, mourn, but it's, like, such a symbol of racism, just like a visual thing that you can point to and be like, look at this.
Yeah.
And, like, it's hard because I think about today, and so, like, I'm a criminal justice major, so I'm like, my research focus isn't necessarily race or racism within the criminal justice system, because I'm more interested in, like, gender and sexuality within the CJ system, but I definitely learn about it, you know, and, like, basically at every level of the system, there's, like, racism involved in our system. And it's just like, how have we gotten this far? And maybe situations like this aren't happening, but situations that are, like, arguably equivalent or just as horrifying, you know? And so it's hard to, like, see this, but at the same time, if you're actually awake, I think, in today's society, it's not surprising that it wasn't that long ago, and that stuff like this still can happen and does happen, you know, that people are killed because of their race. Like, that's a reality in our society. And the parallel maybe with this story also is like Trayvon Martin. You know,
I was just going to say police brutality.
Yeah, police
Absolutely.
brutality and Trayvon Martin in his story. If I'm not wrong, wasn't he in a store as well and left the store?
I think so. Yeah. And
so same thing with Emmett Till. You know, he was in a store. But it's just like, what was it, in 2012 or 2014?
It was 2012.
2012. You know, and it's just horrifying that, you know, how many years later, 60, 70 maybe, situations like this are still happening, but in a different context, of course, you know. And then it was basically just legal. And obviously it wasn't technically legal in the law, but like those people got away with it. Yeah. But now it's legal in a different way. And those police, what is the guy's name? George Zimmerman. He did not get in trouble for it.
I think that's like a lot of it too. Is like, yeah, those people got away with it. And it's like, I think people who are ignorant to it see it today and they're like, oh, they would never get away with that today. And it's like, yeah, but police get away with that.
Yeah, but in different ways, people do get away with it. So in my many years of criminal justice classes, I've had to read The New Jim Crow like multiple times. Not multiple. I think I've read it twice for 2 different classes, which probably the second time I really just skimmed it. So I knew what I was going to be talking about. But it's by Michelle Alexander, who I don't know if if she has her PhD or is a scholar, but she really, really talks about, you know, the history of this country in terms of race and the race issues in our country, and basically how, you know, we went from slavery to separate but equal to, and the whole idea of the new Jim Crow law is that our society has always oppressed African Americans in different ways. And so to say that, you know, oh, well, we're different than we were 70 years ago. Yeah, we might not be doing those exact same things, but in different ways, there is still oppression. And like not recognizing that is horrible. And, you know, they talk about mass incarceration, which I am actually interested in corrections a lot. And I think, do not quote me on this, but I think so our society is roughly like 16 to 20% African American, but our prisons are made up of 40% African American. So like the disparity in that is huge. And it's not that African Americans are committing more crime or more crime that is harmful to society. It's that they're policed different. It's that their sentence difference, or their sentencing, like the length of their sentences, you know, a white defendant versus a black defendant, there are differences in the way, you know, the court comes down on them. Clearly, if we go back to Emmett Till's case and was it 2 men who killed him?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, yeah, it was 2, but then also the brother-in-law kind of came forth and said he had something to do with it, but it's unclear. I looked up stuff about the KKK earlier, you know. Okay. And
interesting. I'm actually doing right now for my thesis. I'm studying media representation of gender and terrorism, and I'm specifically focusing on far right groups, far left groups, and jihadist groups, and it's all domestic terrorism. So I'm studying, and I just actually finished the far right, so like KKK members and, you know, far right skinheads and all of those people. So I just read, like 180 articles on them, and it is just horrifying. I mean, it is just beyond comprehension. And I think even me, as someone who studies criminal justice all the time, I was going through these articles and I was like, how has all of this stuff happened? It's unbelievable. But anyway, so what about the KKK?
Well, in this article from US News, it's the first 2, well, the article is called KKK Groups Still Active in These States in 2017. And the first 2 lines of the article are, the organized Ku Klux Klan movement saw a boost in its membership in 2017. In fact, more than half of today's clans formed in the last 3 years, which is like...
Not surprising.
I mean, it's not surprising, but when I read that, I was shocked. Like, I was just like it's just such a headache. I'm like, why is this still a thing? Yeah,
and you know, like the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, which led, I think, to 3 deaths, possibly, maybe. I know for sure 1 person died, but for some reason I think 3 people died. Anyways, not the point. You know, that was really, I think, what's been going on in our country in terms of like that really like vivid, so like racism, where like people are joining together and being like, we are racist, and we do not You know what I mean? So, like, I think what's been happening is I think these people have all had these ideas and they've all, been at home and having these ideas. And, I think a lot of them were like on Facebook groups or, online and talking to people, and they all had these ideas. And I think in the last 3 years, unfortunately, I think people have just been like getting offline, and the Unite the Right rally was really about like, we are here, and which is so horrifying. And it's like, just stay in your like basement and like talk on your computer,
Yeah.
It's horrifying. And I think that has been in our country, and I think that's why issues like racism have remained the same, because there is still so many people who think that way. But I just think like change hasn't came about because like there are those people, and also the people who like aren't overtly racist. But I just think like, I don't know. Yeah. Do you have anything else about the KKK?
No, that was it. I just like stumbled upon that and I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's like the governor in Virginia who's like doing the blackface, and
Yeah.
I mean, his excuse was insane. Like the fact, like, I don't know if you watched the press conference, but it was horrifying. Like, as like a political junkie, I was like, what is going on here? Because basically first he came out and he denied that that picture was, or no, first he came out and he apologized for the picture. And then the next day he comes out and he's like, actually, that picture is not me. However,
didn't he say it was like stage makeup or something like that?
What?
Didn't he say it was like stage makeup or something like that?
No, he said, however, he said that picture is not him, but he has done blackface before for Michael Jackson and it was like stage makeup or something or something. Yeah. So he was like, wait, that wasn't me, but I did do blackface one time, which is just like so horrifying. Like, I don't know. I am very a person like I was just like, next, like, thank you, next, like, not even thank you, like, bye. Like, I'm very one, and I only bring this up is because I am a TA for a class, and we had a discussion about this, like, should he step down or should he not step down? And, some of the students were like, well, maybe he's grown, which, I'm all for progress and people growing, and it's all a journey for every single person, because I think we are raised in basically a racist society.
Yeah.
And even though I can sit here and talk about how horrible our society is because we're racist, I personally, like, you talk about the, oh my gosh, why am I completely blanking? Basically the racism that is in me that I don't even know. Implicit racism, that's what it is. Okay. So basically, like, the implicit racism that we all have, that even I have. So, like, I love, I can sit here and talk about it, but where am I going with this? What was I just talking about?
Should he step down?
Oh, should he step down? Okay, yeah. So, like,
and becoming aware of
and
changing.
it's everyone has a journey. Everyone has a journey, and but for me, I'm just like, there are a million other people in this country. There's literally millions of Americans. No, I do not think he should be up there, because there are a million other people who are qualified and who can replace him and do, in my opinion, do a better job and not have the controversial past that he has. And that's like kind of a hard thing to like come to terms with, but I don't know. I just think that, I just don't think that he should be up there.
You can still become educated, and once you become an adult, you can like do the research yourself. And it's like, he did do like blackface when he was an adult.
I think it's, it's a journey for everyone. And so I recognize that, because, like, I don't know if you like, if your friends talk about this, but I have some friends who just love to like woke shame people, like, oh, you're not as woke as me, and they like shame you for that. And I think there's also like a mob mentality of the internet these days, and like people say one thing and you are destroyed by the internet, or you're and I think our society needs to find a balance where we're not letting things go, but we're also holding people accountable for their actions.
Yeah, like, I think one thing that, I don't know if you've listened to the podcast, My Favorite Martyr, but they'll do stuff like that. Like, for the first few episodes, they always talked about, they're like, oh yeah, prostitutes, and then somebody came forward and they're like, actually, you shouldn't use that term. They're like, it's derogatory, it's just, nobody, it has no good meaning anymore. But they weren't like shaming prostitutes. They were just using the term prostitute, and they're like, instead use the term sex worker. And they came out, they said a whole thing like, we're not going to use that term anymore. We're sorry. We didn't know that it had these negative connotations. We promise from now on, we will not use it. We will use the term sex worker unless we're quoting that we will use it. But it's like we just didn't understand. And it's like, I think, and they've done that with like so many different issues, and I think they handle it really well, where it's like they're admitting, yes, I was wrong. I didn't know I was wrong. Like, and I'm fixing it by, number one, learning about it and becoming educated on it. And number two, like changing my ways. And so 100%. I think that's something like anybody can do. It's like if you say something wrong, or like if you didn't understand topic as well as you did, and maybe you went with one side and then you learned a little bit more about it and you're like, oh, never mind, I actually don't support that. And it's like, then you need to own the fact that you didn't know it and take steps to correct it.
Absolutely. And I think, so an example of that is, in very modern day too, is Broad City. I don't know if you watch Broad City, but Alana Wexler, she wears in one episode, it's like a comedy, it's on Comedy Central, and she wears Latina earrings, and they say like Latina, and after that episode aired, there's huge outrage. And what did she do? And like, I think like 3 episodes down the line, that like she put in this whole thing basically apologizing, and someone's like, you shouldn't wear those, and she was like, oh no, why not? And like, I think as white people, because we're both white, I think our responsibility is to be receptive, to listen. And, you know, that is maybe not always the easiest thing to do, but like, it really like listen to what people are telling us, and to like, you know, also educate on ourselves on why, like the underlying issues, you know. And so, yeah, I just think there's such good examples of people being like, oh, like, fuck, like, I need to not do that.
Do you have any final thoughts on Emmett Till? Like, honestly, I just, like, want to emphasize again that Emmett Till was a boy with a stutter, and he was just a child.
Like a child, yeah.
Who was murdered for, like, no good, I mean, is there a good reason to murder, but like in really no good reason.
Yeah, like no reason.
It was terrible.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about before I came here was like the death penalty I was thinking about, which, so I have like a very, I guess not super complicated view on the death penalty, but I think if it was in certain context used, I would be okay with it, but I'm against that. Like, I'm anti-death penalty because of the racism involved. So maybe like if we're in some society where there was the death penalty and there was hundreds of years of research shown that it was used in a non-racist way, I'd be fine with it in certain contexts still. So like, I don't even know if I would be okay with like murder, maybe like serial killers or like, I feel like mass shooters or something like that. Yeah, I feel like child rapists, child murder, like children, like don't harm children. Leave the children alone. Yeah, like for me, like that's huge, and I think that is it. But I've thought about the death penalty too, and until you just said it, I never even thought about race into the equation. Yeah. I mean, it is like, it's a thing that's used, you know, and it's, so basically I am in a way pro death penalty, but really not. I would never like say I were to vote on it, I would vote no because of the racism involved in the death penalty. So yeah. And there's also like, I mean, you have to think about like wrongful conviction and 100%. All that stuff too. Yeah. I've heard a couple of people that were wrongfully convicted and on death row speak, and then they like, got out, and those stories are just crazy. I can't even imagine like psychologically the idea of like knowing that you're going to be murdered for a crime that you didn't commit. Like how, like, first of all, I'm the most anxious person ever, so like having to deal with that would be like so bad. There's a show, like dumb show, I think I watched like one season of it, called Grimm, and the guy like could like see like monsters and stuff like that, whatever. But they did like an episode where a guy was about to be put to death for a crime he didn't commit. And like they were like racing against the clock to save him, and I was like overwhelmed like watching it. I'm like, I can't even handle this right now, like this is insane. So that was it. If you guys, I'm sure people have thoughts, comments, stuff like that. Well, the podcast has social media. So there's Instagram, which is HMCT Podcast, Twitter, which is Podcast HMCT, and a website, which is historiesmysteriesconspiracies.com. So go follow those things. You can comment. You can send an email if you like, which is hmctpodcast@gmail.com if you have really strong feelings. So be your weird self. Goodbye.